All right. Sorry for those technical difficulties, but here we go. Snow White and Rose Red. A poor widow lived all alone in a small cottage, and in front of this cottage was a garden with two rose bushes. One bore white roses, the other red. The widow had two children who looked like the rose bushes. One was called Snow White, and the other Rose Red. They were more pious and kind, more hardworking and diligent than any other two children in the world. To be sure, Snow White was more quiet and gentle than Rose Red, who preferred to run around in the meadows and fields, look for flowers, and catch butterflies. Snow White stayed at home with her mother, helped her with the housework, or read to her when there was nothing to do. The two children loved each other so much that they always held hands whenever they went out, and when Snow White said, "Let us never leave each other," Rose Red answered, "Never, as long as we live." And their mother added, "Whatever one of you has, remember to share it with the other." They often wandered in the forest all alone and gathered red berries. The animals never harmed them, and indeed trusted them completely and would come up to them. The little hare would eat a cabbage leaf out of their hands. The roe grazed by their side. The stag leapt merrily around them. And the birds sat still on their branches and sang whatever tune they knew. Nothing bad ever happened to the girls. If they stayed too long in the forest and night overtook them, they would lie down next to each other on the moss and sleep until morning came. Their mother knew this and did not worry about them. Once, when they had spent the night in the forest, the morning sun had wakened them. They saw a beautiful child in a white, glistening garment sitting next to them. The child stood up, looked at them in a friendly way, but went into the forest without saying anything. When they looked around, they realized that they had been sleeping at the edge of a cliff and would have certainly fallen over it if they had gone a few more steps in the darkness. Their mother told them that the child must have been the angel who watches over good children. Snow White and Rose Red kept their mother's cottage so clean that it was a joy to look inside. In the summer, Rose Red took care of the house, and every morning she placed two flowers in front of her mother's bed before she awoke, a rose from each one of the bushes. In the winter, Snow White lit the fire and hung the kettle over the hearth. The kettle was made out of brass, but glistened like gold because it was polished so clean. In the evening when the snowflakes fell, the mother said, "Go, Snow White, and bolt the door." Then they sat down at the hearth, and her mother put on her glasses and read aloud from a large book, while the two girls sat and spun as they listened. On the ground, next to them, lay a little lamb, and behind them sat a white dove with its head tucked under its wing. One evening, as they were sitting together, there was a knock on the door, as if somebody wanted to be let in. The mother said, "Quick, Rose Red, open the door. It must be a traveler looking for shelter." Rose Red pushed back the bolt, thinking that it would be some poor man, but instead it was a bear. He stuck his thick black head through the door, and Rose Red jumped back and screamed loudly. The little lamb bleated, the dove fluttered its wings, and Snow White hid herself behind her mother's bed. However, the bear began to speak and said, "Don't be afraid. I won't harm you. I'm half frozen and only want to be warm myself here a little." "You poor bear," the mother said. "Lie down by the fire and take care that it does not burn your fur." Then she called out, "Snow White, Rose Red, come out. The bear won't harm you. He means well." They both came out, and gradually the lamb and dove also drew near and lost their fear of him. Then the bear said, "Come, children, dust the snow off my coat a little." So they fetched a broom and swept the fur clean. Afterward, he stretched himself out beside the fire and uttered growls to show how content and comfortable he was. It did not take them long to all become accustomed to one another, and the clumsy guest had to put up with the mischievous pranks of the girls. They tugged his fur with their hands, planted their feet upon his back, and rolled him over. Or they took a swazzle hitch and hit him. When he growled, they just laughed. The bear took everything in good spirit. Only when they became too rough did he cry out, "Let me live, children. Snow White, Rose Red, would you beat your suitor dead?" When it was time to sleep and the others went to bed, the mother said to the bear, "You're welcome in God's name to lie down by the hearth. Then you'll be protected from the cold and bad weather." As soon as dawn arrived, the two girls let him go outside, and he trotted over the snow into the forest. From then on, the bear came every evening at a certain time, lay down by the hearth, and allowed the children to play with him as much as they wanted. And they became so accustomed to him that they never bolted the door until their black playmate had arrived. One morning, when spring had made its appearance and everything outside was green, the bear said to Snow White, "Now I must go away, and I shall not return the entire summer." "But where are you going, dear bear?" asked Snow White. "I must go into the forest and guard my treasures from the wicked dwarfs. In the winter, when the ground is frozen hard, they must remain underground and can't work their way through to the top. But now that the sun has thawed and warmed the earth, they will break through, climb out, search around, and steal. Once they get something in their hands and carry it to their caves, it will not easily see the light of day again." Snow White was very sad about this departure. She unlocked the door, and when the bear hurried out, he became caught on the bolt and a piece of his fur ripped off, and it seemed to Snow White that she saw gold glimmering through the fur, but she was not sure. The bear hurried away and soon disappeared beyond the trees. Some time after, the mother sent the girls into the forest to gather firewood. There they found a large tree lying on the ground that had been chopped down. Something was jumping up and down in the grass near the trunk, but they could not tell what it was. As they came closer, they saw a dwarf with an old withered face and a beard that was snow white and a yard long. The tip of the beard was caught in a crack of the tree, and the little fellow was jumping back and forth like a dog on a rope and did not know what to do. He glared at the girls with his fiery red eyes and screamed, "What are you standing there for? Can't you just come over here and help me?" "How did you get into this jam, little man?" asked Rose Red. "You stupid nosy goose," answered the dwarf. "I wanted to split the tree to get some wood for my kitchen. We dwarves need but little food. However, it gets burned fast when we use those thick logs. We don't devour such large portions as you coarse and greedy people. I had just driven in the wedge safely and everything would have gone all right, but the cursed wedge was too smooth and sprang out unexpectedly. The tree snapped shut so rapidly that I couldn't save my beautiful white beard. Now it's stuck there and I can't get away. And all you silly, cream-faced things can do is laugh. Oh, you're just nasty. The girls tried as hard as they could, but they could not pull the beard out. It was stuck too tight. I'll run and get someone, Rose Red said. Crazy fool, the dwarf snarled. Why run and get someone? The two of you are already enough. Can't you think of something better? Don't be so impatient, said Snow White. I'll think of something. She took out a pair of scissors from her pocket and cut off the tip of his beard. As soon as the dwarf felt that he was free, he grabbed a sack filled with gold that was lying between the roots of the tree. He lifted it out and grumbled to himself. Uncouth slobs! How could you cut off a piece of my fine beard? Good riddance to you! Upon saying this, he swung the sack over his shoulder and went away without once looking at the girls. Some time after this, Snow White and Rose Red wanted to catch some fish for dinner. As they approached the brook, they saw something like a little grasshopper bouncing toward the water as if it wanted to jump in. They ran to the spot and recognized the dwarf. Where are you going? Asked Rose Red. You don't want to jump into the water, do you? I'm not such a fool as that, the dwarf screamed. Don't you see that the cursed fish wants to pull me in? The little man had been sitting there and fishing, and unfortunately, the wind had caught his beard so that it had become entangled with his line. Just then, a large fish had bitten the bait, and the feeble little dwarf did not have the strength to land the fish, which kept the upper hand and pulled him toward the water. To be sure, the dwarf tried to grab hold of the reeds and rushes, but that did not help too much. He was compelled to follow the movements of the fish and was in constant danger of being dragged into the water. But the girls had come just in the nick of time. They held on to him tightly and tried to untangle his beard from the line. However, it was to no avail. The beard and line were meshed together, and there was nothing left to do but to take out the scissors and cut off a small part of his beard. When the dwarf saw this, he screamed at them. You brain birds! You've disfigured my face like barbarians. It was not enough that you clipped the tip of my beard. Now you've cut off the best part. I won't be able to show myself among my friends. May you both walk for miles on end until the soles of your shoes are burned off. Then he grabbed the sack of pearls that was lying in the rushes, and without saying another word, he dragged it away and disappeared behind a rock. It happened that soon after this, the girls were sent by their mother to the city to buy thread, needles, lace, and ribbons. Their way led over a heath, which had huge pieces of rock scattered here and there. A large bird circled slowly in the air above them, flying lower and lower until it finally landed on the ground, not far from a rock. Right after that, they heard a piercing, terrible cry. They ran to the spot and saw with horror that the eagle had seized their old acquaintance, the dwarf, and intended to carry him away. The girls took pity on him and grabbed hold of the little man as tightly as they could. They tugged against the eagle until finally the bird had to abandon his booty. When the dwarf had recovered from his initial fright, he screeched at them. Couldn't you have handled me more carefully? You've torn my coat to shreds. It was thin enough to begin with, but now it's got holes and rips all over, you clumsy louts. Then he took a sack with jewels and once again slipped under a rock into his cave. The girls were accustomed to his ingratitude. and continued on their way. They took care of their chores in the city, and when they crossed the heath again on their way home, they surprised the dwarf, who had dumped his sack of jewels on a clean spot, not thinking that anyone would come by at such a late hour. The evening sun's rays were cast upon the glistening stones, which glimmered and sparkled in such radiant different colors that the girls had to stop and look at them. "Why are you standing there and gaping like monkeys?" the dwarf screamed, and his ash-gray face turned scarlet with rage. He was about to continue his cursing when a loud growl was heard, and a black bear came trotting out of the forest. The dwarf jumped up in terror, but he could not reach his hiding place in time. The bear was already too near. Filled with fear, the dwarf cried out, "Dear Mr. Bear, spare my life and I'll give you all my treasures. Look at the beautiful jewels lying there. Grant me my life. What good is a small, measly fellow like me? You wouldn't be able to feel me between your teeth. Those wicked girls over there would be better for you. They're such tender morsels, fat as young quails. For heaven's sake, eat them instead." The bear did not pay any attention to the dwarf's words, but gave the evil creature a single blow with his paw, and the dwarf did not move again. The girls had run away, but the bear called after them, "Snow White, Rose Red, don't be afraid. Wait, I'll go with you." Then they recognized his voice and stopped. When the bear came up to them, his bearskin suddenly fell off, and there stood a handsome man clad completely in gold. "I am the son of a king," he said, "and I have been cast under a spell by the wicked dwarf who stole my treasures. He forced me to run around the forest as a wild bear, and only his death could release me from the spell. Now he has received his justly earned punishment." Snow White was married to the prince, and Rose Red to his brother, and they shared the great treasures that the dwarf had collected in his cave. The old mother lived many more peaceful and happy years with her children. Indeed, she took the 2 rose bushes with her, and they stood in front of her window, and every year they bore the most beautiful roses, white and red. The end of story 1. Our last story for today is also from the same book, The Complete Fairy Tales of the Brothers Grimm, and it is called Puss in Boots. Now, many of you might think that you know this story, but specifically this story from the Brothers Grimm is the original, and it's different. Many people now took the story and have written different versions of it. But I'll read you a short, very, very nice story called Puss in Boots. A miller had 3 sons, a mill, a donkey, and a cat. The sons had to grind grain. The donkey had to haul the grain and carry away the flour, and the cat had to catch the mice. When the miller died, the 3 sons divided the inheritance. The oldest received the mill, the second the donkey, and nothing was left for the third but the cat. This made the youngest sad, and he said to himself, I certainly got the worst part of the bargain. My oldest brother can grind wheat, and my second brother can ride on his donkey. But what can I do with the cat? Once I make a pair of gloves out of his fur, it's all over. The cat, who had understood all that he had said, began to speak. Listen, there's no need to have me killed when all you'll get will be a pair of poor gloves from my fur. Have some boots made for me instead. Then I'll be able to go out, mix with people, and help you before you know it. The miller's son was surprised the cat could speak like that, but since the shoemaker happened to be walking by, he called him inside and had him measure a pair of boots for the cat. When the boots were finished, the cat put them on. After that, he took a sack, filled the bottom with grains of wheat, and attached a piece of cord to the top, which he could pull to close it. Then he slung the sack over his back and walked out the door on two legs like a human being. At that time, there was a king ruling the country, and he liked to eat partridges. However, there was a grave situation because no one had been able to catch a single partridge. The whole forest was full of them, but they frightened so easily that none of the huntsmen had been able to get near them. The cat knew this and thought he could do much better than the huntsman. When he entered the forest, he opened the sack, spread the grains of wheat on the ground, placed the cords in the grass, strung it out behind a hedge. Then he crawled in the back of the hedge, hid himself, and lay in wait. Soon the partridges came running, found the wheat, and hopped into the sack, one after the other. When a good number were inside, the cat pulled the cord. Once the sack was closed tightly, he ran over to it and caught them. Then he slung the sack over his back and went straight to the king's castle. The sentry called out, Halt! Where are you going, cat? To the king, the cat answered curtly. Are you crazy? A cat to the king? Oh, let him go, another sentry said. The king's often very bored. Perhaps the cat will give him some pleasure with his meowing and purring. When the cat appeared before the king, he bowed and said, My lord the count, and he uttered a long, distinguished name, sends you his regards, and would like to offer you these partridges, which he recently caught in his traps. The king was amazed by the beautiful fat partridges. Indeed, he was so overcome with joy that he commanded the cat to take as much gold from his treasury as he could carry and put it into the sack. Bring it to your lord and give him my very best thanks for the gift, the king said. Meanwhile, the poor miller's son sat at home by the window, propped his head up with his hand, and wondered why he had given away all he had for the cat's boots, when the cat would probably not be able to bring him anything great in return. Suddenly, the cat entered, threw down the sack from his back, opened it, and dumped the gold at the miller's feet. Now you've got something for the boots. The king also sends his regards and best of thanks. The miller was happy to have such wealth, even though he did not understand how everything had happened. However, as the cat was taking off his boots, he told him everything and said, Surely you have enough money now, but we won't be content with that. Tomorrow, I'm going to put on my boots again, and you shall become even richer. Incidentally, I told the king that you're a count. The following day, the cat put on his boots, as he said he would, went hunting again, and brought the king a huge catch. So it went every day, and every day the cat brought back gold to the miller. At the king's court, he became a favorite, so that he was permitted to go and come and wander about the castle wherever he pleased. One day, as the cat was lying by the hearth in the king's kitchen and warming himself, the coachman came and started cursing. "May the devil take the king and princess! I wanted to go to the tavern, have a drink, and play some cards, but now they want me to drive them to the lake so they can go for a walk." When the cat heard that, he ran home and said to his master, "If you want to be a rich count, come with me to the lake and go for a swim." The miller did not know what to say. Nevertheless, he listened to the cat and went with him to the lake, where he undressed and jumped into the water completely naked. Meanwhile, the cat took his clothes, carried them away, and hid them. No sooner had he done it than the king came driving by. Now, the cat began to wail in a miserable voice, "Ah, most gracious king, my lord went for a swim in the lake, and a thief came and stole his clothes that were lying on the bank. Now the count is in the water and can't get out. If he stays in much longer, he'll freeze and die." When the king heard that, he ordered the coach to stop, and one of his servants had to race back to the castle and fetch some of the king's garments. The count put on splendid clothes, and since the king had already taken a liking to him because of the partridges that he believed had been sent by the count, he asked the man to sit down next to him in the coach. The princess was not in the least angry about this, for the count was young and handsome and pleased her a great deal. In the meantime, the cat went on ahead of them and came to a large meadow where there were over 100 people making hay. "Who owns this meadow, my good people?" asked the cat. "The great sorcerer," someone answered. "Listen to me. The king will be driving by, and when he asks you who the owner of this meadow is, I want you to answer, 'The count.' If you don't, you will all be in trouble." Then the cat continued on his way and came to a wheat field so enormous that nobody could see over it. There were more than 200 people standing there and cutting wheat. "Who owns this wheat, my good people?" "The sorcerer," someone answered. "Listen to me. The king will be driving by, and when he asks you who the owner of this wheat is, I want you to answer, 'The count.' If you don't do this, you will all be in trouble." Finally, the cat came to a splendid forest where more than 300 people were chopping down large oak trees and cutting them into wood. "Who owns this forest, my good people?" the cat said. "The sorcerer," someone answered. "Listen to me. The king will be driving by, and when he asks who the owner of this forest is, I want you to answer, 'The count.' If you don't do this, you will all be in trouble." The cat continued on his way, and the people watched him go. Since he looked so unusual and walked in boots like a human being, they were afraid of him. Soon, the cat came to the sorcerer's castle, walked boldly inside, and appeared before the sorcerer who looked at him scornfully and asked him what he wanted. The cat bowed and said, "I've heard that you can turn yourself into any kind of animal you desire. Well, I'm sure you can turn yourself into a dog, a fox, or even a wolf. But I don't believe you can turn yourself into an elephant. That seems impossible to me, and this is why I've come. I wanted to be convinced with my own eyes." "That's just a trifle for me," the sorcerer said arrogantly, and within seconds he turned himself into an elephant. "That's great, but can you also change yourself into a lion?" "Nothing to it," said the sorcerer, and he suddenly stood before the cat as a lion. The cat pretended to be terrified and cried out, "That's incredible and unheard of. Never in my dreams would I have thought this possible. But you'd top all of this if you could turn yourself into a tiny animal, such as a mouse. I'm convinced you can do more than any other sorcerer in the world, but that would be too much for you." The flattery had made the sorcerer quite friendly, and he said, "Oh no, dear cat, that's not too much at all." And soon he was running around the room as a mouse. Then the cat ran after him, caught the mouse in one leap, and ate him up. While all this was happening, the king had continued driving with the count and princess and had come to the large meadow. "Who owns that hay?" the king asked. "The count," the people all cried out, just as the cat had ordered them to do. "You've got a nice piece of land, Count," the king said. Afterward, they came to the large wheat field. "Who owns that wheat, my good people?" the king said. "The count," they all cried out. "My, you've got quite a large and beautiful estate," the king said to the count. Next, they came to the forest. "Who owns that wood, my good people?" "The count," they answered. The king was even more astounded and said, "You must be a rich man, Count. I don't think I have such a splendid forest." At last, they came to the castle. The cat stood on top of the stairs, and when the coach stopped below, he ran down, opened the door, and said, "Your Majesty, you've arrived at the castle of my lord the Count. This honor will make him happy for the rest of his life." The king climbed out of the coach and was amazed by the magnificent building, which was almost larger and more beautiful than his own castle. The count led the princess up the stairs and into the hall, which was flickering with lots of gold and jewels. The princess became the count's bride, and when the king died, the count became king, and the Puss in the Boots was his prime minister. The end. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed both of those stories. Those were some of my favorites from that book. And I also hope you join me tomorrow at 11. I may change the time according to my school schedule and your school schedule. So if this doesn't work for you, please let me know and I can change it starting next week when my online school starts. I'm so happy that you joined me, and I'll see you tomorrow at 11.